I will go ahead and get started then. So thank you all for joining us this afternoon. My name is Nicole Kim, and I manage the Department of Conservation's Forest Biomass to Carbon Negative Biofuels pilot program. I'm joined here with part of our interagency team, who we will be introducing throughout this workshop, as well as Director Shabazian and our executive sponsor, Elizabeth Betancourt. We're here today to solicit your input on this pilot program. Last year, the feedback we received through our RFI workshops and comments submitted to our program were instrumental to not only the development of our phase 1 solicitation, but also to the structure of the program itself. So thank you to those of you who partook in the process last year, and we're looking forward to discussing this with those of you who are here today. As potential applicants, current grantees, and interested stakeholders, we really value your input and as we begin the development of our phase 2 solicitation. So to kick things off, I will hand it over to Director Shabazian.
Thanks, Nicole. Hey, thanks everyone for joining us today. I've been really encouraged by the interest in this program. I wanted just to do a little table setting, just to remind ourselves of why we started this program in the first place. And really this was to address the kind of serious and very significant challenges that we have with forest health throughout California, with this program focusing on the bulk of those forests, the Sierra Nevada, but certainly also, giving us a chance to test out some ideas about how to manage biomass, how to manage forests throughout California. But really, that's the first line of business here, is to really reduce the risk, the frequency and the severity of fires in the Sierra Nevada. But then right behind that is to really focus on ways to use that biomass to create new economies, new industry clusters, and new economies in rural parts of California. And the program is really, aligning with some key initiatives laid out by both federal and state governments around air quality, around wildfire, around economic development. Some key touch points for us is the scoping plan for achieving carbon neutrality that came out of CARB back in 2022, last year. And, also that is, really the underpinning of, a lot of initiatives that, again, both achieve, better air quality for California, but also opportunities for new industries here, like the one that we're going to be talking about today. With the 8 grants that we put out last year, if all of those came to fruition, we estimate that we'd be reducing carbon emissions by 1.4 million CO2 equivalents per year, million tons of CO2 equivalents per year. This is also, a way for us to really tackle the 1 million acre initiative. So trying to, do forest treatments on 1 million acres a year. And that these projects are part of that. And they also, again, they give a pathway for that biomass to go somewhere and be productive. If you can't use it in, wood products for construction or other purposes, in this case, we can use it for fuels and energy production. And so that is, an incredibly important product of this initiative, but there's also a lot of co-benefits or other products that come out of this. Things like, improved biodiversity, improved watershed function, just the basic environmental health of our forests, replacing fossil fuels. And, I think most importantly also here is the safety of our communities, but in the forested areas, but also on the valley floor. I mean, I'm in Sacramento today, seeing smoke blowing down from the north. So this is not just a rural initiative, although it's primarily, about rural assets and the management of those rural assets, these natural resource assets, and the communities that are embedded in those landscapes. But really, it's benefiting all of California. And I think that that's where this really, the importance of this really starts to take hold, is, again, and creating better health for California and just overall improved environmental function. So I'm really, again, heartened by the interest in this program. I think it's more than I expected, and I'm really happy that we're seeing so much interest here. I'm also really happy that we're seeing really strong partnerships being formed, and particularly the inclusion of tribal governments in these proposals. I think that's incredibly important, and we can start to incorporate, some of these more traditional methods of managing our forests, but link that to, these more contemporary ways of using this biomass. So while this is, again, the interest is huge and really encouraging, I think we also have to keep in mind that this is a pilot program, and as such, it has a limited amount of funding. And so what we're trying to do is really maximize, what we can do with this funding to showcase the potential in California. And so I want us to all kind of keep that in mind as we move forward here, that we are trying to really stand up, good examples of what's possible. And so, this process with all the partners that we have in really standing up this program is, I think, reflecting, the kind of the state of the practice, and also, a lot of different interests in both how you do this and the outcomes that we're trying to achieve. And so let's just keep that in mind as we move forward with this round 2 of funding for actual implementation. So with that, I appreciate again your interest and your time here today to learn more about phase 2. And, I will probably have to jump off here because I have many other meetings that I have to attend, but I'm going to stay on for a little bit. And really look forward to hearing some of the conversations that come together today. So with that, I will hand it back to you, Nicole. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for the additional context and for your continued enthusiastic support for our program. It really means a lot. So I'm going to go ahead, and I had put together this workshop agenda, and then we made a little bit of a last minute change. Just as we go through the phase 2 eligibility and evaluation criteria, we'll be stopping after each section and soliciting input for each of the criteria, and that will all make sense as we move further along. But I'm going to go ahead and get started with our program overview. So as a quick refresher, $50 million was announced in the 21-22 budget and allocated in the 22-23 budget for the Department of Conservation to dedicate to projects in the Sierra Nevadas that create carbon negative fuels from materials resulting from forest management practices. We're currently working closely with CEC and CARB to administer this program, with additional support from our larger interagency team, which includes CAL FIRE, OPR, CPUC, the U.S. Forest Service, iBank, and GoViz. And as Director Shabazian touched upon, much of this program aims to invest in projects that demonstrate diverse technologies, builds strong partnerships with local and tribal governments, leverages existing state and federal programs, and shows the application of diverse funding sources and models, identifies new economic development opportunities in rural areas, and includes such projects as part of public health and safety efforts. So as Director Shabazian mentioned, the program also contributes to several state and federal priorities, in addition to producing a multitude of environmental and economic co-benefits. So we're really working to meet many critical needs with the state for this program. So a little bit of background, through considerable stakeholder input last year, we decided to split the program's funds into 2 phases. Phase 1 was directed toward planning and development grants, and phase 2 is focusing on implementation grants. We received 19 applications through the phase 1 solicitation last year, and with the support of our interagency team, we selected 8 projects to receive $500,000 for planning activities such as engineering design, feedstock studies, or feedstock supply studies, environmental compliance, LCAs, and more. These year-long planning grants will conclude in March of 2024, which brings us to phase 2 of this program, where we will offer funding for facility construction and biofuel production. So we currently have $43.5 million of funding available in this phase to fund 2 to 4 individual projects of up to $20 million each. We expect projects funded in phase 2 to construct, commission, and produce carbon negative fuel within the grant term. And applicants do not need to have received a phase 1 award to be eligible for phase 2. So our anticipated phase 2 timeline. As of this summer, we have officially started our phase 2 solicitation development process, which includes both a public and tribally focused RFI workshop, as well as the option for individual consultations. You can contact us through our program email address if you're interested in having a one-on-one conversation. And all of that relevant contact information will be on the last slide of this presentation. We anticipate that the draft phase 2 solicitation will be released in late fall of this year, and we will host a draft solicitation workshop to once again solicit your input. And our goal is to release the final phase 2 solicitation at the end of this year, alongside hosting a public webinar to review the solicitation, document, and answer any last questions. So if all this goes according to plan, our phase 2 awards list will be announced in the spring of 2024. So I wanted to include a quick review of the phase 1 eligibility criteria because it's still applicable to phase 2 of our program. So in phase 1, we had 5 eligibility requirements: that the project must use 60% or more forest biomass waste as feedstock sourced from the Sierra Nevada with geography defined by the Sierra Nevada Conservancy's boundary. The planned facility had to also be located within the Sierra Nevada using the SNC's boundary, plus 10 miles in any direction as long as it's within California. We, through stakeholder input, decided to extend this definition to also include the geologic definition of the Sierra Nevada, where we decided not to rely on one specific interpretation to determine project eligibility, instead leaving it to the applicant to make their case and provide evidence from reputable sources such as the California Geologic Survey or the US Geologic Survey. And the project also is required to produce a liquid fuel or hydrogen. Syngas, including biomethane, was considered an approved product, and the project applicant had to understand that the fuel produced must be carbon negative on a life cycle basis, and that the fuel produced must be used in California. Our goal today is to initiate conversations and discussions with you, our stakeholders, on our phase 2 solicitation by first providing a high-level overview of our draft phase 2 eligibility and evaluation criteria. Prior to providing cost shares for construction activities in phase 2, the DOC expects project developers and competitive applicants to have demonstrated progress across multiple areas. A high-level description of each of the idealized success metrics are described in this presentation. Note that they are anticipated and idealized success metrics and not pass-fail evaluations. Funding may be awarded to an applicant whose project has not yet met these metrics, but expenditure may not be allowed until the progress in key areas has been achieved. The phase 2 eligibility criteria will be denoted with an asterisk, and these, of course, are items that will be considered pass-fail when scoring applications. While we welcome comments and questions submitted through Zoom during this workshop, we also want to strongly encourage formal comments to be submitted to our program email. Our intention today is not necessarily to answer all questions on the spot, but to begin the process of gathering feedback that will help guide the development of our phase 2 solicitation. That being said, I will hand things over to Elizabeth now.
Hello, thank you so much for that introduction, Nicole. I am also wondering, sorry, before I start on the community work, I think we have a couple of our panelists who are called Nicole Kim, but may have just used your link to enter.
Oh, no.
Nicole. So for those panelists who may be named Nicole Kim on Zoom, but are not actually in reality named Nicole Kim, would you please rename yourself just so we know everyone's here? Thank you.
I was wondering what was happening there.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Nicole. That's a great setting, and huge thank you to our director. Yeah, the effort to get this program off the ground has definitely been a team effort, and really appreciate our executive level support. So the community work is incredibly important to this program, and it is partly what sets the Department of Conservation's work in this space apart, or aside from some of our sibling agencies' work, which is very purely energy or innovations work. And so we do rank and rate a lot of these community components very highly. So again, just to reiterate Nicole's point, has to be in the Sierra Nevada. So feedstock, the majority of it needs to come from the Sierra Nevada. And the capital expenditures, so the facilities you build, the work you do in the forest, if you're doing CCS or biochar, those kinds of expenditures, a majority of those need to be in the Sierra as well. From a partnership perspective, we want to be sure that our grantees are taking advantage of the synergies that the state offers in terms of grant programs and other incentives. So that includes workforce development. The state is making really significant investments in these spaces right now in forestry, technology, the transition of our energy workforce. And so we would like to see that you have a workforce development plan in place, and certainly would love to see the operationalization of some of the state's plans and projects in your program of work. We also feel that community support is absolutely essential in these spaces. You all probably know better than we do that these projects sometimes have some community support issues, biomass energy in general, and specifically sometimes energy to the grid for those of our partners who are doing that work. And so we want to be sure that you, as the emissaries for this technology and this application, have a good relationship with your host community. So that's why we require community support. And that can be in the form of a letter of support from any of the entities listed here. It can be represented by actual financial investment, either money you are requesting to help in supporting the community, or that the community is contributing in cost share or time to making the project work. So we just want to see that collaboration. And next slide, I think, Nicole. Thank you. And then I know a number of our phase 1 grantees are working on community engagement plans, either writing or actually implementing them. We would like to see that you have a plan in place. There's no hard and fast rule for what that looks like. But again, because this is such an important element of our program, we want to be sure that it's something that you actually have an intention of doing as part of implementing the facility. And then we would love to see, this isn't essential, but would love to see a meaningful investment in a disadvantaged community or severely disadvantaged community. In many grant programs, this is identified or defined by the Cal EnviroScreen, which identifies California's environmental justice communities. But because there are actually no environmental justice communities as defined by Cal EnviroScreen in the Sierra, we're using the disadvantaged community definition. And you can find that in our phase 1 solicitation. That is the 80% of California's median household income from the last census. And Nicole, I think that's it for the community slides.
Great. Yeah. So I guess a little additional context is that we'll have 5 different categories, that criteria that we're going through. And this is the first of 5. And we thought it would be helpful to stop along the way at each section and solicit input for each of them. So at this time, if anybody has any feedback or any questions that they'd like to ask about the community requirements or the community evaluation and eligibility criteria, please raise your hand if you'd like to speak or submit a comment through the chat. Yeah, I feel like this may be one of the less contentious sections, so it might be a nice way to start out. All right. If we don't have any comments at this time, we can also just move on to the financial feasibility section, which I believe is new.
Yeah, and also just encouraging all of you to submit comments in writing also. So even if you don't have them now, if you have them later, or even if you have them now, please do submit them in writing later also. We are, for those of you who applied in phase 1, we gave some extra points for disadvantaged community location or tribal involvement in this section. And so if you have thoughts about whether we should do that again or anything else, we would love to hear from you. Should we move on?
Yeah.
All right. I think our next section Oh, financial feasibility. All right. We have Dan Adler with us. Very lucky to have Dan as a partner on this program. He is Deputy Director for Climate Investments at iBank. I hope I got that right, Dan. And hopefully most of you, if not all of you, are very familiar with him because he also runs the Climate Catalyst Fund, who has and is in the process of making really significant investments in some of our bioenergy companies here in the state. So Dan, would you take it away here?
Sure. Thank you, Elizabeth. Thank you, Nicole. It's great to be with you all. We are working at iBank to find ways to be supportive of projects in forest biomass utilization. They are not as technologically ambitious as the projects under consideration here. So that's a way of saying we know that there's a lot of challenges associated with just the financing component of the work that we are asking our partners to consider. So in that context, as Nicole mentioned, please consider these ideas at this stage. We very much want your feedback, what works at the project level. It's one thing to say what policymakers and agency folks would like to see, and another thing to understand what would actually meet tests in the marketplace. So please take all this in draft. We are considering a match funding component, effectively requiring it articulated here 100% match demonstration, or another way of phrasing it, no more than 50% of total project costs would be funded by this grant. So there is a need to demonstrate the source of the rest of that funding and the sequencing of that. We also would love your feedback on. One sequence potentially could be demonstrating a term sheet for the balance of the capital at the point of grant submission, and then when the grant award is actually made, having the financial closing effectively consummated simultaneously. So there's a period of time between the term sheet and the actual securing of the funds as one concept. We are certainly looking for fully developed financial pro formas about the sources and uses. This is standard project finance, but these are not standard projects. So there's a lot that's embedded in a source and use for projects like this. All the associated investment documents about funding for the totality of the project, particularly so we know it's going to get all the way to financial completion, not just financing through the utilization of the DOC grant here and then no plans for actual completion of the exercise. Let's go to the next slide. Thank you. The business model, the operating details regarding revenue sources, contracted spot market offtakes, modeling of feedstock, and other input costs. Our work so far in forest biomass, again, at smaller scale, the feedstock sourcing and the variability associated with it in terms of quality and timing, volumes, and pricing, hugely important. That's really the nub of this exercise. So we're looking for details there. We mentioned a little bit about the community level co-benefits, but how those are showing up in terms of the production and financial elements of the project, and then all the associated benefits, co-benefits in terms of carbon values, carbon credits, RFS, how those are modeled in, what the financial implications of those are, how they support project viability, and what the operating model is for monetizing those benefits. There's certainly a range of different project risks that we're going to want to evaluate from a financing perspective, both the nature of those risks, the kind of list of them, but how the proponent is modeling them, understanding them from not just a static perspective, but over the course of the project life, its operating performance, and then of course the mitigation strategies for addressing all those risks. And then the range of other considerations around risk, including supplier diversity, supply chain contingencies. You see the list here, alternative feedstocks in the event, logistical issues associated with, again, the day-to-day project operation. This goes to the question of, or the perspective of finance, which is not just financing the thing as built, but financing the operation of the thing so we actually get the benefits throughout its expected operating life. So dynamic risk analysis, it's a challenge, but finance knows how to handle it. We're certainly standing by at iBank and in other areas of the state capital equation to help work through it, and keen to get your feedback, questions now, subsequently, and thank you again for your support of these efforts. I think that's it for finance.
Thank you, Dan. Do we have any questions regarding the financial feasibility criteria discussed today or anything else?
There is a question in the Q&A about, can we designate the business model as confidential? It's an anonymous attendee. If you would like to provide additional context, please raise your hand. But Dan, do you have any thoughts on that? And probably Nicole also, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think it's probably more for DOC because this is your process and your rules would apply. The projects that come to iBank are protected from the Public Records Act in California. We have similar protections to what a CalPERS and CalSTRS would have as they look to invest capital. So it's quite strong, but this is not an iBank-led effort, so I think it's more for DOC.
Yeah, I do think in many ways we will approach the business model similarly to how we approached phase one, which is requiring a clear designation of what items in the application are designated as confidential, but that's still an area that we have been discussing and will continue to discuss in a lot of detail with our attorneys. So as of now, yes, that's definitely the approach we intend to make, but if there are any changes, those will be made very explicitly clear in the phase two solicitation. And then, yes, go ahead.
Yeah, sorry, you were probably going to read the same thing I am.
Yeah, I have it open, so the question and answer function makes it easy. Mark asks, can match be federal funds? So we have not waded through the details of exactly what will be considered a match, but federal funds would certainly qualify. Does that make sense, Dan?
It does, although I will note that a lot of federal programs themselves require some amount of what's called, in their model, sponsor equity. So it would be a little bit of like, is our money filling that federal requirement, and is the federal requirement filling state requirements? From my perspective, having third-party private sector capital in transactions like this is meritorious. But again, that's just me talking. I don't think that's in the criteria yet, but we would need to look at the interaction of those federal requirements with our own.
That makes sense. Do we have any other questions? I think that we may have answered all of the ones available. So we'll also have kind of a longer discussion or a longer allotted time at the end of this presentation for anyone to ask questions that they've thought of along the way. So thank you so much, Dan, for your input on the financial feasibility aspect, and thank you for your expertise. It's been really crucial to the success of our program so far.
Thank you.
All right, and I will continue on. So we're now moving on to engineering.
All right, really pleased to welcome Taiying Zhang to the webinar today. Taiying has been with the California Energy Commission for 7 years. And we were just talking before the webinar about the evolution that she's seen in California's investment in biofuels and the different stages and the different technology and innovations that she's seen. So we're really lucky to have her expertise as part of our early solicitation development. You will probably remember Rosaldo from our phase one work. He is not gone. He will be back, but is enjoying some vacation time. So thank you, Taiying, for standing in for him today. And thanks for reviewing our engineering criteria.
Sure. We actually just finished a similar solicitation. I know how difficult the Forest Biomass project could be. So I really wish the best luck to our developer. Now for the engineering, the 3 aspects. First is about the basic technology description. The technical feasibility has to be described in details through narrative discussion and illustrated by process flow diagrams. Mass and energy flow details include the kind of like each type and amount of biofuel biomass to be processed. That's the feedstock part, the input, and also the output, each type and amount of the fuel and co-product to be produced. The energy, the biomass conversion rate and energy efficiency. If applicable, please discuss the replicability of the proposed technology and also long-range scale-up plans to expand your project, your technology. The second is about the technology maturity. The proposed technology has to be ready for demonstration or commercial scale production. So that means the minimum technology readiness level is 7. This is based on the DOE's definition for the technology readiness level. If you have question, we probably can provide the link for that. Then the front end loading, we call that basically marks the stage of the project. For the phase 2, we require to complete the second stage and make clear progress towards the completion of stage 3. We know the stage 2 is for the feasibility study and pilot plant testing. So stage 3 for you have to finish all the basic engineering and optimization. Only after that you can start engineering, procurement, and construction of the project. That's the main part, and that's the purpose of the phase 2. The third aspect of engineering is about thank you, Nicole, about the technical, economic performance and validation. So please describe the key result of your preliminary technical economic analysis, including but not limited to the quantification of input, both the mass and energy, and the product, the byproduct, the cost of the production. So that's the process cost. Also, please describe the detailed the technology validation by an independent party with the key components and integrated system process. I think that's all. That's a 3 part for the engineering. I will back to Elizabeth.
Great. Thank you so much, Taiying. We do have a comment in the chat here that I think is a really important one. Sutton comments about TRL being an eligibility requirement, but that some technologies may deploy different, or some projects maybe may deploy different technologies in different combinations that may not have a TRL that's the same as their component parts. Do you have any thoughts about how that might be considered, Taiying, or we can also just take that comment under consideration as we develop the solicitation?
When I from my kind of like my experience, we know for the overall process, you basically use some of the, it's kind of like shelf-ready technology for kind of like some part that's more difficult. I think we basically focus on the core technology, which means your conversion technology, how you convert the biomass to the biofuel. That part would be the core technology. The other part, like how do you pre-treat your biomass? How do you kind of like do the separation or the different, if that's basically the unit operation, you don't really need tells each part, the details. Basically, that's, I think the pretty sure that the core technology is the core, and the other part you can just mention. I think we basically means the core technology.
Great. Thank you, Taiying. Sutton, if that doesn't answer your question, okay, awesome. Glad it did. Feel free to raise your hand if you'd like to add context. Anyone who'd like to ask a question, of course. Any more questions on engineering? Thank you, Sutton. Yes, we love written comments. It is, this is great to have conversation, and we really appreciate having a heads up of what you're thinking about. But the written comments are especially helpful because they allow us to go back and forth between what we're working on and a reminder of things that our potential applicants have opinions about. All right, Taiying, thank you so much for helping out with this. Appreciate you and your program work.
All right. I don't need an introduction, so I'll go ahead and get started on the execution. For the next section, we'll have execution and our feedstock supply plan categories kind of melded into one, and then stop for questions afterwards. But for our execution criteria, we have very specific CEQA obligations because we understand that CEQA can really end a project in its tracks. And so the project must either be in full and complete compliance with CEQA or be on track to completing the CEQA process, including a CEQA determination already made by a lead agency to DOC within 6 months of notice of award. Prior to approval of proposed award, the DOC must comply with CEQA and other applicable environmental review requirements. That's just shorthand for saying that we can approve an award, but the expenditures will not be approved until we have notice of the full completion of the CEQA process. Also relevant to the CEQA obligations, the applicant should have identified and obtained all permits required for the project, or if all permits have not been obtained, a feasible and detailed timeline of that process should be provided. For land tenure and site control, we also expect that the applicant has documented land tenure or site control of all properties that are serving as the project location, and that the applicant has documented the existence of sufficient capacity, accessing all required off-site infrastructure, including but not limited to electricity, water, natural gas, road and rail as applicable. And then we have some very specific requirements for our feedstock supply plan. So we are going to have John McCarthy from CAL FIRE take over that section.
And just in case anybody doesn't know John, he runs our state's and CAL FIRE's Wood Products and Bioenergy program. He's a deputy chief in that program. You should know John if you don't already. John, we're really pleased to have your help in implementing this and giving some insight into expectations around feedstock. We know that's one of the most challenging parts of these projects. So take it away.
Thanks, Elizabeth. Yeah, and I do see quite a few of our grantees in our business development grants that are on the call, and some dedicated applicants. And we appreciate the dedicated applicants. Funding is always tight. We don't always have enough money to help all the good projects, so there is this competitive nature to it. So I'm going to spend 2 slides here talking about feedstock. So we know that California is going to generate millions of bone dry tons of biomass to accomplish what we need to do. So someday we hope that feedstock will be plentiful, and your facilities will be doing everybody a favor by taking it. We're still stuck in a place where it's difficult to procure feedstock. Some of the rules are still looking at things that come off of the forest as a product and a valued product and not as a waste. So you can have a stronger application by firming up your feedstock supply plan. So part of that plan should include, and I want to also talk about, eligibility versus competitive. So the guidelines state what's eligible. Competitive is what's going to be, your project exceeding what's eligible and comparing well against other or contrasting with other applicants. So we want to see a strong supply agreement. It could be either a formal or informal agreement, a plan that shows specifically, the more specific, the better. Where is your feedstock going to come from? If you've got partner letters, contracts, that's a very strong feedstock supply plan. We also, the plan needs to prioritize forest health or fire hazard reduction work. So for example, a timber company that's growing trees and reforesting through clear cut, which is a completely appropriate tool for forest management and growing trees, that would not be eligible feedstock for this program. So things that are thinning the forest, leading towards healthy forests, either federal or state, fire hazard reduction, fuels treatments, those kinds of projects are what's eligible. And 60% of the feedstock needs to come from Sierra. You can have ag, sawmill residues, or municipal waste, but the goal is forest biomass from the Sierra Nevada. So be competitive, prioritize that. Also want to quantify how many bone dry tons annually are you going to be utilizing. Next slide, please. So also, again, in the long run, I hope this is a waste material and people are pounding on your door asking you to take this material from you. That's the way we're going to get to 1 million acres a year. And until then, it's on the applicants at this point to come up with a strong supply plan that shows your sustainable long-term supply, close proximity to the to your facility. A mix of landowners is stronger too. The more types of landowners you have, you kind of de-risk the challenge of running short on feedstock. We also would encourage you to have a wood procurement specialist on your team. Sawmills, they all have some sort of procurement specialist. Often it's a forester. You can have them be an employee. There are contractors that'll do this. That somebody who knows the markets, knows where feedstock is, and can find it for you, so that you've it's delivered in a way that you can store it, deck it, and operate 12 months a year, though you're not likely to have continuous deliveries. I believe that is the end of the feedstock slides.
Thank you, John. We have some really good questions in the chat. One is from Chip about what are the amounts of feedstock that will be considered. I know that's partially a grant program decision, but because you're part of our grant development team, we would love to get your thoughts on that.
What are the amounts in terms of like how large, how many bone dry tons? What are there minimums? I don't know that your grant guidelines have minimum bone dry tons, right?
That's right. We don't. Yeah, I'm reading it as amounts of feedstock of bone dry tons. Yeah.
Yeah. So we don't have a minimum at this time. Sorry, John, for putting you on the spot about our program.
Well, more it will be more competitive.
Yes,
there we
good
go.
answer.
Thank you.
Right.
Let's see. The next question from Jill. And Jill, I should say, John, I'm going to ask you this because I think this is probably more a CAL FIRE question, but she's asking whether there's any chance that future grant awards will favor or require moving materials to biomass facilities as part of treatment plans, rather than alternative fates like mastication and leaving it in place, lop and scatter, pile burning, etc.
Yeah, that's a good question, Jill. I would just, it isn't for this, but just speaking about grant programs in the state in general, I mean, there's certainly places in the state where mastication is the most appropriate tool, or lop and scatter. Pile burning, we're going to try to get away from that, but there's still may be places where pile burn is the most appropriate. So I think I see where you're going with that, and I hope that there's just so much available through mechanical thinning on lands that are in proximity, and we'll have more facilities, that it's more about, are you are you doing the appropriate treatment of the biomass, not so much favoring one or the other. I think each place will be a question of appropriateness.
And just to add to that, John, you and I and a few others on this call are in the wood utilization work group with the Forest Task Force and working on a strategy for woody biomass waste management in the state. And Jill, one of the actions that's been discussed as part of that is the requirement for any state grants requiring that work done, I think it's within a quarter mile of roads, something like that, actually include biomass mobilization to a utilization source, whether that be some kind of building material or energy or whatever. So that's not final yet, but the conversation is happening. So,
yeah, and the federal organizations agree. We want to get away from projects where you're allowed to move the material out of the woods, deck it on the side of the road, and be done. We don't want that.
Yeah, totally. There is a question in the Q&A, John, that is maybe, Don, I might need your hand raised. But John, does that question make sense to you?
Let me see. I'm not seeing a question.
Okay, so he's saying the challenge is that—
open. Okay, I see.
See that? Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, and Dawn, I see your hand up. I'm going to invite you should be able to unmute now, Dawn.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, John, thank you very much. John, quick question. I guess two parts question. One, are you distinguishing or prioritizing between dead, down, and diseased forest fire fodder versus green tree trimming? Is there a preference between that?
I like that question, and I would say for this program, I don't believe so, and I would say in general, our goal is healthy forests, and in some situation that's going to mean removing the dead, down, and diseased. In some places, it's going to be thinning green trees that are overstocked. I've heard some discussions, with say a Forest Service, on a ranger district. They have an area that just burned. Do they put their money into salvage logging the burned or thinning the green that didn't burn? I think they're both appropriate strategies.
Okay, and the second question is, if you're effective in clearing out forest fire fodder, as I call it, in any given area, on a long-term sustainability basis, you're going to be moving around. And one of your criteria is to be as close as possible to the consumption of this biomass as the source of getting it. If you're effective, you're going to start moving, and obviously you're going to use the closest sources first, and then you're going to be moving further out. For long-term sustainability, years over years over years, are you going to be looking at the distances and providing some leeway in terms of how far you have to move that biomass?
Yeah, it's an important point that the farther things are away, the more expensive they are to move. Ideally, we move towards developing additional facilities out to reduce those distances. So I think there could be a combination of large facilities in central areas and small facilities in rural areas to decrease those distances.
Okay.
I don't know if
I
don't feel I'm answering your question too well, because I really like your question.
Well, it's not. It's difficult because you don't know how much biomass is going to be in a given area. You're going to move in there. It's going to be based on a certain mix of species, and particularly for some of the processes that use the biomass in converting syngas, your ability to do that is a function of the mix of species, the BTU content, a number of other factors. So you kind of want to obviously cherry pick that biomass, which is most conducive to your process early on, but over time, you're going to have to move around to get the appropriate biomass for your process.
Agreed. Yeah, and so some technologies that are mobile will also be part of the solution.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Don. Thank you, John. I don't see any more questions or any hands. So, John, thank you so much for the feedstock review. And I think our remaining section, Nicole, is negative carbon accounting. Awesome. And we're pleased to have Anthi Alexiades join us from the California Air Resources Board. She has been such a resource and trove of information on the breadth of technology and how all of it and the combination of technologies is going to help us in meeting our statewide goals of climate resilience and emissions reduction. So Anthi, take it away.
Thank you, Elizabeth, and thanks everyone. Nice to be here. Okay, so just as a reminder, as I'm sure you're all well aware, the program requires projects to create fuels that are carbon negative on a life cycle basis. So all that means is when you add up all of the emissions from, all the stages, the feedstock collection, processing into fuel, the end use or fate of your fuel and your carbon, and you subtract the amount of carbon that will be permanently stored or sequestered, and then you divide that by the total amount of fuel produced, say in a year, you get a negative number. So it's a little different than inventory accounting in that sense, but I know a question that we've got a lot. I'm going to go ahead and reiterate this so that everybody's starting off on the same page with the LCA. Removing residues from the forest to reduce wildfire risk is not in itself considered a carbon negative activity. And that can be for a couple of reasons, right? One is if the carbon that you're removing is then eventually released somewhere else, or if it takes, so much fossil fuel at various parts of the, stages of the process, then that's going to sort of erode the benefit that you're bringing. And so the way that you achieve a carbon negative fuel is some form of carbon storage, right? And so all of the projects that were funded in phase 1 each proposed to use geologic CCS or to sequester the carbon in products like biochar. So all of those applications that we reviewed, in phase 1, that were funded, had sufficient basic information that we needed to estimate the carbon balance. So, that's just to put it, in really basic terms, how much feedstock are you going to use? How much fossil fuel do you need? How much fuel are you going to produce? And how much carbon will you store, right? That's enough to do the basic, back of the envelope kind of math. And get a good sense of whether it'll ultimately be negative based on that sort of bare bones kind of framework. So in this next round, it'll be a little bit different in that, you'll need to demonstrate more robust accounting. And, where we understood in phase 1, a lot of people were going to be relying on some sort of, assumptions, expectations, literature, values, and whatnot. We really want you to be thinking about setting up those calculations this time around in a way that you can iterate and update them as you, start to refine your design, lock in your supply radius, figure out your carbon logistics. Maybe you're doing some lab or pilot testing, et cetera. And so that's going to be really important because you need a plan to perform, sort of ongoing LCA as you develop the project. All right, I think we can go to the next slide, please. And so these next couple of slides really just lay out exactly what we listed in Appendix D of the phase 1 solicitation. Tried to give you really detailed, clear information on exactly what we're looking for in the phase 2 application. So I'm not going to bother to read through those, but we'll give you a minute to read them. And then, happy to take any feedback or questions on these requirements. Oh, I guess one thing I'll say here while you're reading, a picture is worth 1,000 words, right? So the items on this slide are, you know, really about giving us that overview, the narrative, the big picture, you know, what are all the steps in your life cycle? What are all the unit operations in your facility? And, you know, back, you know, in my prior life when I was actually doing bioprocess engineering, you know, I know that that flow chart is something you probably already have and have worked on. And I think, you know, drawing your system boundary is like step one when you're performing an LCA. It's like, okay, what do I need to be accounting for? Where do I expect emissions to be occurring? Let's go ahead and flip to the next slide so folks can see that, the next set. Thank you. So yeah, this just describes, you know, specific pieces of information you want to address both in the narrative and of course have those values represented in your calculations.
All right. Sorry, I was actually just typing an answer on the into the question thing, but I'll just ask you. We have an anonymous attendee asking about electricity being considered an eligible carbon negative fuel if the power is used on site for charging public transit buses and biochar is produced for sequestration.
Got it. Okay. We might need more information to answer that question. So certainly encourage you to, you know, connect offline, but essentially in phase one, you know, we entertained a similar question and, you know, the applicant was first going to be producing hydrogen or syngas. And so we were able to, you know, make a call that, you know, the production of that intermediate fuel that then would get converted into electricity does meet the eligibility guidelines. So provided that that's a similar case here, yes, there are some eligibility restrictions that the language isn't right on the top of my head, but about, you know, not using combustion as the primary conversion technology. So that might be something else to take into consideration.
Thank you, Anfi. We have someone asking about being a sub to a grantee and how, we can answer questions about getting it contact information for applicants. I'll answer that one in a moment. But the carbon negative question, will there be a determination made as to whether a project will be carbon negative? And if so, what methodology will be used to determine this?
Okay, yes, so it is up to the applicants to demonstrate that their project will be carbon negative on a life cycle basis. Hopefully that answers that.
No, it's from Graham. So Graham Noise, if you would like to raise your hand, I can unmute you and we'd be happy to talk more about that.
Hi, Anthony. Am I coming across okay?
You are.
Okay, great. So yeah, just this is something of significant importance, I think, here to really understand how this is going to be done. I certainly appreciate that. I would expect that different people will be using different methodologies, relying on different literature and trying to get as much guidance as we can as soon in the process as possible to know what the measuring stick's going to be here.
Yeah, well, that's, you know, one of the things that we're hoping to get from this workshop and any, you know, follow-up communication. You know, certainly want to be able to give you as clear instructions as possible. So do let us know if there are, you know, some assumptions that you think might make sense to standardize. We're certainly open to and happy to do that. You know, I know in phase one, we addressed a few things like that, like trucking capacity, right? What size is the chip van? Well, you don't know really yet at this stage, right? So here, everybody can use the same assumption. And similarly with the biochar, you know, the fraction of carbon that's recalcitrant and expected to be permanently sequestered. So we're happy to provide some standardization, or at least consider what type of guidance. I think, you know, generally relying on peer-reviewed literature is wise. And I think, you know, maybe as much as I would love to say, you know, if we find one little assumption that we don't think is robust, you know, that's not going to constitute, you know, make you ineligible. I would love to say we could iterate and let you know, give you an opportunity to improve on that. But I am going to encourage you to sort of reach out if you have major concerns about some information that you're not confident you'll be able to substantiate. And we'll try to give you some guidance in advance, as long as you can sort of foresee those things a bit. But yeah, please, you know, bring us any specific questions that we can help clarify in the instructions, and you know, like I said, consider some standardization where that might be helpful to you.
Very good. Thank you for that, Anthony.
All right. Do we have any more questions regarding our carbon negative accounting? All right. Well, I guess in that case, thank you, Anthi. I'm sure we might have more in the future, but for now, I will address Graham's question about, or no, it was Hemant, who asked, is there an opportunity to be a sub-grant to the grantee? How can we get contact information for applicants? So our phase one applicant information is available on our program website, which I believe Elizabeth provided a link to early in this chat, and also will be included on the last slide of this presentation. And if you are having trouble finding that list, please feel free to reach out to us through our program email address, and we can send you that applicant list. And that way you can maybe see which applicants align with your work and reach out to them individually. Oh, thank you, Elizabeth. She just posted our program website again. Do we have any other questions? Why is phase two open to those who did not apply in phase one? So the reason we decided to approach this program in 2 phases was understanding that this industry is really nascent, and that currently there are no existing forest biomass to carbon negative bioenergy facilities in California. And so understanding that there are many barriers to success for projects, for the type of project that we were interested in funding, we wanted to give as much of an advantage to some of the early applicants. And so our goal is to successfully fund a project that will create carbon negative biofuels from forest biomass waste. And so we are not looking to limit our applicant pool to those who only applied and were successful in phase one. It doesn't necessarily give you an advantage just to have been in phase one, other than the additional planning and development activities you could have completed with our funding. But we're really looking agnostically across all phase two applicants. Do we have any other questions? Elizabeth, is there anything that I've missed? Because if not, I can kind of head toward wrapping things up for us.
I think that's it, Nicole. Thank you.
Okay, great. All right. Well, in that case, it looks like we've made it through the questions, so I'll cover a few next steps before we close out the workshop. Please use our program email address to submit any formal comments, and to request an individual consultation at any time before the final solicitation is released. Although earlier is definitely better for us. And please sign up for our listserv through the program website listed here to stay in the loop on upcoming program workshops and events. We do have an upcoming workshop on financing biomass energy facilities next Wednesday, and you can find that information on our program website at this time. And we will also be posting a recording of this workshop on our website within the next month, in case you want to reference it. And if you want access to the slides, please feel free to reach out to us through our email address. I see there's something in the chat. Okay, great. Thank you all for your support of this program and for sticking around till the end. We really look forward to hearing from you soon. And with that, Elizabeth, in case there's anything I haven't missed, I hope you all have a great afternoon.